North Korea's Kim Jong-un reportedly oversaw the tests of two types of missiles, one for a super-large conventional warhead and the other for a nuclear warhead on Wednesday, in yet another show of military strength. So what is the focus of foreign media coverage about these latest launches? What are pundits saying about the regime's recent disclosure of its uranium enrichment facility? And what is the South Korean public's response to North Korea's nuclear threat? Hello and welcome to this Workweek's first edition of Issues and Insiders, following the long weekend here in South Korea to mark the Chuseok holiday. It's Thursday, September 19th, and I'm in Sunhee. Today we touch upon the stories here on the Korean Peninsula, making headlines elsewhere as well. And for this, I have our panel of foreign correspondents. I have Sebastien Falletti, a correspondent for French daily Le Figaro. Sebastien, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Andres Sanchez Braun with the Spanish news agency EFE Spain. Andres, it's good to have you back.
Thank you, Sunhee. It's always fabulous to be here.
Sebastien, let's start then with details about North Korea's latest missile launches and the concerns they are triggering.
Yes, North Korea on Wednesday conducted additional ballistic missile test. This is in line with what leader Kim Jong-un has been announcing over the last 2 years about building up the capabilities of North Korea, in particular in being able to target its immediate neighbor, which is South Korea, but also possibly Japan. There is a particular interest about one of the missiles that was launched yesterday with what the regime call a super large warhead, and the ability to carry a very heavy payload of 4.5 tons. So this is a signal that is sent clearly to Seoul, a threatening sign. The regime has said that the new ballistic missile has a range of roughly 320 kilometers, which clearly indicate that this is targeted as to South Korea, and it looks like we are in a tit-for-tat phase at the moment. This is a way to replicate to Seoul a Yunmu missile that was unveiled earlier this year. So it's a way for Pyongyang to signal to South Korea, to the Yoon Suk-yeol government, that they are not deterred, that they will keep going on their military buildup, and if South Korea keep pressing, there might be more escalation. All this is happening, of course, in a context of very fraught relations since the suspension of the military agreement between the two Koreas. We know that North Korea is sending trashes with balloon almost every week over the last few months. So we are in a very deteriorated bilateral relation, and this ballistic missile just adding to this trajectory. And the question is, what is the end game? What is Pyongyang trying to do with this build-up?
Right, and staying with the build-up, Andres, these latest launches follow the regime's recent disclosure of images of Kim Jong-un visiting a uranium enrichment facility that pundits say indicates clear advancements in North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions. Do tell us more about that.
Indeed, this was actually the first time that North Korean media has ever released footage from its uranium enrichment facilities. It showed Kim Jong-un accompanied by some officials visiting these premises. Location was never specified, of course. These premises that contain all these centrifuge devices. Now, the only person that had previously seen something like this was U.S. nuclear scientist Dr. Siegfried Hecker, who in 2010, while visiting the Yongbyon Nuclear Research Center, was actually shown some of these cascades of centrifuges. But the ones that he saw, apparently, the model, the known as P2, these that we saw the other day apparently appear to be newer or different, and probably used indigenous North Korean technology, and also the clusters or cascades as they're called, seem to point out that the number of centrifuges is larger too. So this could mean, for example, already maybe a larger production capacity of highly enriched uranium than what was thought before. Maybe even bigger purity. You know, the higher rate of the uranium, the 235 isotope present, the more fissile the material is to manufacture a bomb, etc. On top of that, Kim Jong-un said that he actually wants to increase capacity to build more centrifuges in order to increase stockpile of highly enriched uranium, in order to increase his stockpile of nuclear weapons. Now, we can think of the messaging here and the timing, right? Everybody's aware that we're barely, 47 days, I believe now, from the U.S. Presidential election. So I think this was clearly intended as a way of North Korea to make itself present before the election. I don't think their intention was to influence U.S. voters. I don't think anybody believes at this point that North Korea is capable of changing anybody's votes in the U.S. right now. Weapons of mass destruction, the North Korean ones were not mentioned in the Trump-Harris debate that we saw last week. It wasn't mentioned either during the Trump and Biden debate. But I think at this point, what North Korea is trying to do, it's trying to signal to whoever wins the election in this case, like, look, we are going to be a headache once you come into power. We're doing this, and we're going to need you to act on it. So in the case of Trump, they're probably, signaling it, after the Hanoi summit fiasco, this is what's been going on. We're enriching more. We're trying to increase our arsenal. So if you want to solve this, you have to come up with a different frame of thinking. I think they're telling also Harris the same thing, pretty much like the Biden's administration approach has been fruitless so far. So basically the message for both of them is like, try to think out of the box at this point. And I think in the coming weeks, we could actually maybe expect right before or right after the election, maybe an important weapons test, probably not a nuclear one, because as we've mentioned before, I think China and Russia kind of draw that red line with the nuclear tests and their support to North Korea right now, but maybe something related to an ICBM or a multiple reentry vehicle, something that once again, kind of proves that North Korea is intending to be a real credible threat to the United States security.
Right. And amid the threat posed by North Korea, Sebastien, a recent survey by the Associated Press shows South Koreans are starkly divided over the threat posed by North Korea, the nuclear threat. Tell us a bit more about the findings by the Associated Press and the implications.
Well, I mean, of course, South Korea today is a very polarized country, like we saw at the last parliamentary election. But there's nothing new in this divide over North Korea. I mean, since the founding of South Korea, there's been a politically charged debate about how to deal with North Korea, with the North Korean threat. We know that the political divide is pretty consistent. Some people on the right will of the political aisle will advocate for a strong position of deterrence, closely linked to the US, and then on the left you are more open to engagement, to trying to develop cross-border, better relation with North Korea. So this is nothing new, but today what's interesting is that if you look at the young generation, we are seeing now a generational gap. Younger South Koreans are getting increasingly negative about North Korea or indifferent. When you talk to the young generation in South Korea, you can see that there's less and less interest with North Korea, which is really seen as a foreign, remote country while in the past, for previous generations, still there is a bond, there's a human connection, sometimes a family tie with the enemy. So this is, I think, what's happening here, and it makes the North Korean issue even more complicated to deal with, because of course you have this growing indifference, and I think all this comes in a certain context, which is what Andres mentioned, the coming US election, which is also instilling some anxiety about the future for South Korea, because of course the potential return of, for example, Donald Trump could also trigger some anxiety here about the notion that could there be another deal with Pyongyang? Is it in the interest of South Korea? Especially the current administration has been investing heavily on the US-Korea alliance. But what if the next administration is actually turning its back and opening the way for a close relation in Pyongyang, and potentially also putting into question the presence of US troops here? I mean, this is all like question mark at this stage, but we are also at a moment where, of course, South Korea, like many countries in the region, also in Europe, is anxious to see what the outcome of this presidential race in the US.
Right, indeed. Andres, against the backdrop, of course, of tensions here on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea's high-level exchanges with Russia continue. Tell us a bit more about these exchanges, and do you believe these interactions are a cause for concern?
Well, they are indeed concerning for Seoul, for Washington, even in Brussels, because of the multilateral implications of this so-called strategic alliance. But yeah, we've learned this week that North Korean Foreign Minister Sunhee visited Moscow. She was invited to this Women International Conference, but you know, Sunhee rarely travels overseas, and in the space of 9 months, she's been to Moscow twice. She was there in January, where she met President Vladimir Putin. We also learned last week that current Secretary for the National Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, visited Pyongyang too and met with Kim Jong-un. Shoigu was already in Pyongyang last year in July, remember, when he was walked around that arms exhibit. And basically all of this just proves once again that North Korea and Russia have reinforced ties in terms of security, of defense, and all this was, as we remember, showcased basically in June when Vladimir Putin visited Pyongyang for the first time in 25 years and met Kim Jong-un, and they signed this new strategic alliance document that includes a clause that calls for mutual assistance in case of attack, right? We also have the implications on the other side of the Eurasian plate, if you want to call it that, in the Ukraine front. We have Kiev right, denouncing continuously that the exports from North Korea of mainly artillery to the Russian army are actually making it very difficult to counter the Russian offensive. They're also talking about short-range missiles, but those are apparently not working as well, and the amount also is ostensibly lower. But it makes you think, because you know, now there's Kiev demanding the U.S. to let it use its long-range missiles to do deep attacks within Russian territory. Of course, Washington is holding back on that for the moment. But you know, you ask yourself, what if that happens? What if finally Kiev does get those missiles? Then would North Korea, for example, consider, you know, Russia would be under attack, and it would be with weapons supplied by the U.S. What would North Korea do in that scenario? So this new so-called alliance is definitely concerning, of course, in different dimensions. Yeah.
Right, and amid that situation, Sebastien, South Korea and the US are discussing a new defense cost-sharing deal, especially ahead of the US presidential election in November. What more can you tell us about these discussions?
Yeah, indeed, we've heard that the talks have just resumed about the next defense sharing cost. The current agreement is going to expire in 2025, next year, but they are already starting the talk, and they are hoping that they could complete that discussion by the end of this year. That's what people say on both sides, which is an interesting timing. What is at stake is that currently South Korea is spending around $1 billion US dollar for the financing of the 28,500 US troop base in the peninsula. Of course, this cost is going to raise. The question is how much, and everybody remember that in the previous negotiation, Donald Trump, when he was president, was asking for a quadrupling of this amount, which created a lot of tension between Seoul and Washington. So clearly there's an intention, at least on Seoul's side, to rush this negotiation this year before the potential return of Trump to the White House. So the discussion is now ongoing. Last time there was an increase of 13% of the budget. So the question is in what range this is going to be for the next round. In the context that Andres just described, where there is increasing geopolitical cloud on the horizon, and also this growing connection between what's happening in the Western so-called front, like on Ukraine, in Europe, with the Asia-Pacific front. So that's also increased probably the value of this negotiation, even in the eyes in Washington.
Right. And Andres, hypothetically speaking, what do you believe are the prospects of a complete withdrawal of American soldiers from the Korean Peninsula under a possible Trump administration?
Well, hypothetically, I think under a Trump administration, I think anything is possible, as we all have pointed out countless times in this show. And I think the point here is uncertainty when it comes to Trump. But as Sebastien just mentioned, the cost-sharing issue is one that Trump has made an important point of during his previous administration. He did so also with NATO when it came to contributions of member countries, etc. Who knows? Because the fact that he sees every foreign relationship as something transactional, of course, when you think like that, any outcome is possible. I think, on the other hand, that there would be safeguards if Trump made that call. I mean, to be honest, I don't think, hopefully, that this would happen, even if Trump at one point calls for it, because even allied countries like Japan would step in and say, like, look, I don't think this is a very wise decision right now in terms of security for the Asian Pacific region. We're all together here in a very complex situation that includes Taiwan as well, China, Russia, North Korea. And as this anonymous op-ed that was published in the New York Times during Trump's first administration, apparently there should be some adults in the room taking care of things. So hopefully, if Trump wins, we will not have to come down to this kind of situation.
Right, hopefully. Staying with security, Sebastien, there has been a crackdown in the West over Chinese-made surveillance equipment, and a similar move here in South Korea recently led to the removal of over 1,000 cameras from military bases. What is the latest on that front, and what do you suppose are the potential dangers?
Yeah, very recently the South Korean army announced that they're withdrawing 1,300 cameras from which were surveilling some of the bases across the country, not on the DMZ, but at least on some of the bases. And they say basically these cameras were built by a South Korean company, but they were apparently a lot of the components were made back in China, which is interesting because it shows also the very close relationship between South Korea and China still today. But this decision showed that there's a kind of a wake-up call among the South Korean military about the risk posed by China, and that also signaled a kind of a shift, strategic shift, while until recently, of course, the key focus was North Korea, and it's still North Korea, but there's a growing awareness that China is also potentially a military challenge or a threat, and this is also happening in the context of the US strategic push to involve South Korea and its Asian ally in the containment of China. So I think this small information clearly is interesting, not so much about the impact, because it doesn't look like these cameras were at the most strategic location, but it shows there's a new awareness here in Seoul about China. So, and it would be interesting to see how China reacted to that in the coming weeks and months.
Right, well, it is a developing story. So, Andres, meanwhile, back in North Korea, I hear the regime has launched a large vaccination campaign, the largest since the pandemic. Do tell us a bit more about this campaign.
Yes, in July, around 4 million vaccines were delivered together with refrigerators and freezers by, Gavi, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, Vaccine Alliance. These vaccines for measles, rubella, diphtheria, tuberculosis. And basically, the problem here was that North Korea decided to shut down completely for more than 3 years, and still is partially closed, as we know. And despite North Korea, back in the day, right before the pandemic, having a really good, actually, vaccination rate, North Korea has been praised many times because of its high vaccination rates that were over 90%. Because of the border closure, of course, and mainly because children have missed many of their due vaccinations. Now this rate, some people believe that might have fallen as low as around 40%. So finally, apparently, in the coming weeks, around 800,000 of these vaccines, I believe, will be inoculated in children, and 120,000 will go to pregnant women. So, all in all, good news for the North Korean people, of course. But as UNICEF has pointed out, it's the fact that UNICEF staff need to be present in the country to better monitor all these processes, because the whole process had to been done telematically to instruct people to give the vaccinations. So hopefully we'll see UNICEF and other international organizations present in North Korea sometime soon.
Right, hopefully for the people there, of course. All right, then, Andres, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Sebastien, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.